great to be here. Now, if you've got a Bible, I'd like you to find Luke chapter 8. Now, it perhaps help us a little today if we pick up just a few things from the last message, just to refresh our memories. Now, in the last session, we were taking a disciple's eye view of Jesus. And we said that simply a disciple's eye view means to see things as the disciples saw them. Now, when we read some of the wonderful things that Jesus both said and did in the Gospels, we often read a verse, and we're halfway through the next verse before we understand what the first verse we read was like. Now, the disciples, on the other hand, they were there. They heard it, and it had time to sink in. They didn't rush somewhere else as they were walking. They were talking about what they just heard. So sometimes we rush through and miss something. Today, we live in an absolutely crazy environment. Everything has got to be done yesterday. The pace that we live in at is absolutely mad. Even the language that we use demonstrates this. Fast food. Instant coffee. Even with your telephone now, it's speed dialing. The big difference is this. The disciples walked with Jesus. And what we try to do is run with him. And you can't do it. Now, there's a lot to be said for some of the theology that was in some of those old hymns. When we walk with the Lord in the light of his word, what a glory he sheds on our way. So we need to walk a little slower and just see what we can learn. Now, in the 8th chapter of Luke's Gospel, we started last time in verse 21. And we found Jesus explaining what it meant to join his family. Verse 21 said, "But he answered and said to them, My mother and my brothers are those who hear the word of God and do it." And then in verses 22 through to 25, we found Jesus performing a wonderful miracle. While sailing on the Sea of Galilee, this terrific storm arises. And the boat that they were in was about to sink. And Jesus rebuked the wind and the waves, and there was a terrific calm. Luke tells us that after the threat of the storm was removed by Jesus, instead of calming the disciples' fears, they were more afraid. Then we had the question that Jesus put to his disciples. The storm's over. They're floating on a nice calm sea. And Jesus asked them the question, where is your faith? This incident was followed by more trauma and more terror, because when they come to land, on the shore they were greeted by a wild, demon-possessed man. We're right here, right in the middle of two spectacular miracles. Jesus had calmed the sea, and now he was about to drive out a demon, a legion of demons, out of a man. This man had been demon-possessed. He'd been bound with chains, and he'd broken every chain ever put on him, and he'd shattered every shackle that had been put on his feet. Luke tells us, for he had often been chained hand and foot, but he tore the chains apart and broke the irons off his feet. Verse 29 tells us that Jesus had commanded the unclean spirit to come out of the man. Now it is verse 35, and like us to look at this, we see the amazing impact that it had on the local townspeople. When they went out to see what had happened, and came to Jesus, and found the man from whom the demons had departed, sitting at the feet of Jesus, clothed and in his right mind. And they were afraid. In verse 37, Luke describes the response of the local townspeople to Jesus' deliverance of this demonic. The Gadareans asked him to depart from them, but they were seized with great fear. When Jesus not only restrained the man, but expelled the demons and completely healed him, they didn't like it. Those who had helped this man before now asked Jesus to leave. Why? They were afraid, said Luke. You know, this is absolutely amazing when you think about it. Jesus saves the lives of all his disciples by stopping a storm and calming the sea. And they were more afraid after the storm than they were during the storm. Jesus lands on the shore. He meets a demon-possessed man that the townspeople have been trying to tame for years. Jesus drives the demons out, and we now find this man sitting, clothed, and in his right mind. And the townspeople asked Jesus to leave because they were afraid. Well, that's where we finished last time. So we started today in verse 40. So it was when Jesus returned that the multitude welcomed him, for they were all waiting for him. When Jesus returned, the crowd welcomed him. They were all expecting him. Jesus returned across the Sea of Galilee back to the Jewish area. In contrast to the crowd on the other shore, who'd asked him to leave, the crowd here welcomed him. They were waiting for him. The people who'd seen Jesus leave assumed that he'd return again to the same place, and they were not disappointed. This is what we read in verse 41. And behold, there came a man named Jairus. He was a ruler of the synagogue. He fell down at Jesus' feet and begged him to come to his house. For he had an only daughter, about 12 years of age, and she was dying. But as he went, the multitudes thronged him. Jairus had left his house in a hurry. He went to the lakeside, where he heard that Jesus was in a fishing boat, and he would be returning to the shore at any time. Every moment was precious to the father of this dying child. When he saw the fishing boat land and Jesus disembarking, he rushed to Jesus and he implored Jesus to come to his house to heal his daughter and save her from certain death. The synagogue ruler believed that Jesus could heal this precious child. Jairus was a leader of a local synagogue. As a leader, he was recognized and he was highly respected. Now, the synagogue was a local center of worship, and Jairus was elected as one of the leaders. Now, the synagogue leaders were responsible for supervising worship services, caring for the scrolls, running the daily school, distributing alms, administering the care of the building, and they were responsible for the ministry on the Sabbath. The ruler of the synagogue was something like our pastor. You manage both the spiritual and the business affairs of the synagogue. Now, despite his important position, Jairus came and fell at the feet of Jesus, pleading with him to come home with him. Now, this would have been very unusual, but Jairus was desperate because his only daughter, who was about 12 years old, was dying. Jairus' position as a loving father overshadowed his position as a leader. He put aside any concern for himself and went directly to the man that he believed could help his daughter. Jesus went with Jairus, and as usual, the crowd went along with him. The crowd had welcomed him to the shore. They'd witnessed Jairus begging Jesus to come and heal his daughter. And word went out amongst the crowd, and they all fell in step with Jesus. Some had probably been eyewitnesses to the other miracles that Jesus had performed. Verse 41 tells us, but as he went, the multitudes thronged him. Jesus sets off to go to the house of Jairus, but while there was still a long way to go, something happened that delayed him for some time. A woman came in the crowd. She reached through, trying to touch the robe of Jesus. Can you just imagine how Jairus was feeling? All he would be thinking about at this time was getting Jesus to his daughter as quickly as possible. This is what we read in verse 43. Now a woman having a flow of blood for 12 years, who had spent all her livelihood on physicians, and could not be healed by any, came from behind and touched the border of his garment, and immediately her flow of blood stopped. And Jesus said, who touched me? When all denied it, Peter and those who were with him said, Master, the multitude saw and press you, and you say, who touched me? Well, Jesus said, somebody touched me, for I perceive power going out from me. Now when the woman saw that she was not in, she came trembling and falling down before him. She declared to him in the presence of all the people the reason she had touched him and how she was healed immediately. And he said to her, Daughter, be of good cheer. Your faith has made you well. Go in peace. What was Luke referring to when he said, now a woman having a flow of blood for 12 years? Now, the Bible doesn't give us any definitive proof, but most commentators assume that this issue was surrounding a menstrual cycle. And this is very important, because in Jewish culture in the 1st century, a woman was classed as unclean at this time each month. If the illness that this woman had got was extending this time, then it was also extending her time of isolation. This also explains a nervous approach. The law was very clear about her condition. She was not to touch anybody, and nobody was allowed to touch her. Now you can understand why she tries to hide herself in the crowd. Luke tells us in verse 43, now a woman having a flow of blood for 12 years, who had spent all her livelihood on physicians, and could not be healed by any. Luke, being a doctor himself, tells us that this woman had used up all the resources that she had. She'd spent all her life savings, She'd gone to every doctor and type of healer that you can imagine. Luke describes this to demonstrate the incredible miracle that Jesus performed. In other words, Luke was indirectly saying to his audience, Jesus was not just another healer, doctor, or prophet. This woman had tried all these things. It took divine power to bring this miracle about. This woman had a real problem to overcome. The illness she suffered had made her unclean. For 12 years she suffered with this. She tried everything that she could find to get a cure. But it seemed as if there was no answer to her condition. I know that Mark describes it in his account of this in Mark 5 and verse 27 tells us. When she heard about Jesus, she came behind him in the crowd and touched his garment. For she said, if only I may touch his clothes, I shall be made well. Immediately the fountain of her blood was dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of the affliction. Once that she's closing up, she reaches out and touches the edge of Jesus' garment. And when she touches the garment of Jesus, the impact was immediate. The bleeding which she dealt with for 12 years ceased. This was the power of Jesus. By merely touching the edge of his garments in faith, her healing was instantaneous. Jesus immediately stops the crowd. What we read in verse 25. And Jesus said, who touched me? When all denied him, Peter and those with him said, Master, the multitudes throng and press you, and you say, who touched me? In the next verse, we find something that we don't ever think about. Every time that Jesus performed a miracle, it took something out of him. In verse 46, but Jesus said, somebody touched me, for I perceive power going out from me. Back to the story again. Now, this group's on the way to Jairus' house because his 12-year-old daughter is near death. And they believe that Jesus could stop death from taking her. Time was of the utmost importance. And yet Jesus stops the entire group in the tracks to address the situation. Can you imagine the desperation of Jairus and those close to him, what they thought at this time? But Jesus was unconcerned about the time it was going to take. Because he did, and he still does have, absolute power over life and death. So whether the girl was alive and well, whether she was near death, or even dead, it was of no importance to Jesus. Jesus, by drawing this woman out of the crowd, this wasn't meant to embarrass or shame her, but rather to have her to demonstrate her faith. Sometimes it's necessary for Jesus to cause a believer to step out into the light and act on their faith. She declares to Jesus before all the people why she touched him and how she was healed. Jesus shows empathy and kindness to this woman and the condition with which she's dealt with for so many years. Once again, Jesus, in dealing with this woman, sets aside the conventions of society and replaces them with acts of love and mercy. The impact of this woman touching Jesus was both immediate for her and immediately felt by Jesus. Now when the woman saw that she was not in, she came trembling and falling down before him, and she declared to him in the presence of all the people the reason she touched him and how she was healed immediately. And Jesus tells her, "Go in peace." And he said to her, "Daughter, be of good cheer. Your faith has made you well. Go in peace." Having been healed of her natural ailment, she would no longer have to face the turmoil society had brought into her life. This alone was a peace that was marvellous. It was a peace that she'd not experienced for 12 years. The simple ability to live a normal life. Now, while Jesus talked to the woman, who was now healed and filled with joy, the friends of Jairus brought the sad news that his only child had passed away. The news was devastating. Then the friends of Jairus told him not to bother Jesus any longer. The time for mourning had begun. It meant that special mourners and flute players and those who were hired for the funeral arrangements were there doing the job. Jesus heard the news that the friends had brought Jairus. He was fully aware of the situation. And then I love the way Jesus speaks to people. Jesus turns around and he makes this wonderful promise to Jairus. In verse 30, "But when Jesus heard it, he answered him, saying, 'Do not be afraid, only believe, and she will be made well.'" Don't be afraid, only believe. Now Jairus had shown faith when he went to the harbour with his request for help. He believed that the only person that could help his daughter was Jesus. Now Jesus told him not to fear, but just keep on believing. The fact that death had entered the family circle of Jairus made it difficult for him to believe and not be afraid. Jairus knew that Jesus could heal the sick, because there were several people in Capernaum that Jesus had brought back to normal life. A paralytic. There was a child of an official. The servant of a centurion. And there was a woman who had just been healed of the issue of blood. Nevertheless, he thought that his case was different, because his daughter was dead. Could Jesus, who would heal so many people, be able to raise a person from death to life? Now Jesus understood what was going on in the mind of Jairus. And without delay, he led him out of that grief. He told Jairus, "Don't listen to your friends and the sad news that they brought. Now is the time to place your full confidence in Jesus." Fear in the face of death is understandable. But to have faith in the face of fear, well, that's commendable. When Jairus brought Jesus to his home, the paid mourners and the flute players had already arrived, and they were engaged in loud wailing and beating the chest. Instantly Jesus took control of the situation. He didn't allow anyone to enter the house except Peter, James and John, together with the father and mother of the child. Now the noise had been excessive. But when Jesus appeared, everyone became quiet. Verse 52. Now all wept and mourned for her. But he said, do not weep, for she is not dead, but sleeping. And they ridiculed him, knowing that she was already dead. But he put them all outside. His words had caused peals of laughter, for they knew that she was dead. At the same time, their hilarity demonstrated their insincerity. It revealed that their sadness was just an outward show. Now the next verses are especially significant. Jesus allowed no one in the room except the parents and 3 of his disciples. Verse 51, then he came to the house. He permitted no one to go in except Peter, James and John, and the father and mother of the girl. Now I tried very, very hard to get a good illustration to bring this next point home. And I'm sorry, I'm apologising before that, this is the best I could do. We all know what happens when someone has a tonsillectomy. They remove the tonsils. And it's the same with an appendectomy. They just remove the appendix. Now before this miracle can take place, there's an operation. Jesus performs a negativectomy. Jesus removes the unbelievers from this girl's bedside. Their lack of faith was interfering with the mighty acts of God. He permitted no one to go in except Peter, James and John, and the father and mother of the girl. Now there's a lesson here for all of us. All of us are subject to so many negative influences. In the world we're surrounded by cynics who don't believe in God or the possibility of God making positive changes in our lives. Now we need to take the opportunity whenever we can to sit in the congregation of believers where we can be in an atmosphere of faith, just like the one that Jesus had created around this girl. That's why I believe that we're exhorted in Hebrews 10 and verse 25, not forsaking the assembling of yourselves together, as the manner of some is, but exhorting one another, and so much more as you see the day approaching. Jesus, the girl's parents, and 3 disciples entered the bedroom where the little girl was lying, and Jesus takes over hand. Then Jesus took hold of her hand and said, little girl, arise. And then her spirit returned, and she arose immediately. After their mocking, which arose after Jesus had previously silenced them, Jesus causes yet another great conflict. Jesus puts them out of the room. Now left with the dead young girl was only Jesus, 3 of his apostles, and the mother and father. This intimate group would be witnesses to this great miracle. Jesus then approaches the young girl and takes her hand in it. What an incredibly kind and beautiful gesture this is. To take hold of her hand with all that tenderness and care. The body, the soul, and the spirit knew exactly who Jesus was. He was the divine Son of God, the Most High. And immediately they respond to him. Jesus, as if he was just awakening her from natural sleep, he only says, arise, and life returns to this young girl. Now, Jairus' astonishment, it's not founded in unbelief. He had faith in Jesus. He'd gone to find him personally. And he still believed after his daughter's death. We see this by Jairus bringing him back to his house. The astonishment comes because this was more than any imagined Jesus could do. This was a miracle outside the realm of their understanding. And let me tell you, as a community of believers, we need to be reminded of our need to be astonished by God. Think about that. For us to be astonished by what God can do. His work in the lives of his people is still beyond their wildest imaginations. And his blessings are still greater than anything which could be expected. You know the verse as well as I do in Ephesians chapter 3 and verse 20. Now unto him who was able, listen to this, to do exceedingly, abundantly, above all that we ask or think. Now think about this bit. According to the power that works in us. You want to take that scripture and let it roll over, meditate on it. Take that into your spirit. Abundantly, above all that we ask or think, according to the power that works in us. You know, if we let God loose in our lives, we can do some marvelous things. This miracle of resurrection occurred in the privacy of that bedroom. Jesus, who was the way, the truth, and the life, granted life to this young girl. The miracle that took place in the house of Jairus displayed Jesus' power over death and the grave. Jesus, the life-giver, possessed absolute authority. His command uttered in simple wording to the 12-year-old daughter was sufficient to bring her back to life. He merely told the daughter of Jairus to get up. The instruction given to the girl was, after she'd risen, to her parents was, give her something to eat. And this, really, there was meaning in this. This was meant to demonstrate that she was resuming to normal life. She'd be eating and drinking again. The days of her illness had come to an end. And now she could continue with the daily activities. And their parents were astonished. But he charged them to tell no one what had happened. Jesus told the parents not to talk about their daughter's healing, because he knew that the facts would speak for themselves. Jesus wasn't attempting to keep this a secret. The crowd outside waiting knew what had happened. Jesus was probably asking them to keep to yourselves the details of what had happened, because he didn't want to be known just as a miracle worker. He wanted people to listen to his words. Words that could heal their broken spiritual lives. Jesus' mission was to preach the good news of the kingdom. If crowds descended on him to see dead people being raised, they'd be coming with the attitude that wasn't really good. They needed to come in the attitude of someone who could hear and respond to the gospel. Jesus' main objective was to preach salvation to the people. Healing was just a proof that God had sent him, and it was not his main mission. Jesus didn't want to be mocked with so many coming forward seeking miracles, and not the greater gift of eternal salvation. if the news of this miracle was widespread. Well, let me finish with what valuable lessons we can learn from this morning's message. Now, we have two completely different situations. Jesus did not fail Jairus, and Jesus did not fail the woman who needed healing. Now, I don't think we can find two greater contrasts, two different people, and two different sets of needs. Just listen to this. Jairus had 12 years of sunshine that were about to be extinguished. The woman had had 12 years of agony that seemed hopeless to heal. Jairus was an important man, the ruler of the synagogue. The woman was a nobody. She wasn't even named. Jairus was probably wealthy because he was an important man. The woman was poor because she spent everything she got on doctors. Jairus came publicly. The woman came secretly. Jairus thought Jesus would have to do a lot to heal his daughter. The woman thought all she needed to do was just touch him. Just touch his robe. Jesus responded to Jairus after a delay. Jesus responded to the woman immediately. Jairus' daughter was healed secretly. The woman was healed publicly. But in serving both of them, we see how the work of Jesus is different. And yet it's the same with every individual. If Jesus could touch each of these needs personally, he can touch our needs, no matter how different they are, in exactly the same way. With this event, in the 8th chapter of Luke, it's brought to a close. And this chapter of Luke focuses heavily on the faith of believers and how faith is variable. It also establishes examples of the divine power of Jesus. By calming a storm, by casting out devils, bringing back to life a dead girl. And this is the lesson this morning I feel that is for us. Don't try to believe and figure it out. Don't try to believe and make any sense of a delay. Instead, be like Jairus and the woman with the issue of blood. Just believe and leave the rest to Jesus.